episode 4 of the Chetori podcast. My name is Nader,
And I am Shayan.
and we're very excited to have you listening to us today. Thank you again to everyone who's been following us, who's been responding to our stories, who's been spreading the word. Please continue to share your views, share our clips, follow our pages. We're now on Anchor, Google Podcasts, Castbox, YouTube, Instagram, and probably 4 more by the time that this episode is put on. And we're very excited to see the response that we're getting. Before we get into today's episode, we just wanted to take a couple moments to talk about the earthquake in Hui. We briefly talked about this in episode 2, but this earthquake, it was quite destructive.
Yeah, it was a 5.9 magnitude earthquake that hit the city of Hoi, which is in the northwest of Iran. And as a result of this earthquake, 3 people were killed and hundreds injured. And it seems like many people have lost their homes, and are living in the streets right now. And I don't know if you know about anything. I don't know if you know anything about that certain part of the region in Iran. Around this time of year, it gets very, very, very cold.
Yeah, it's not fun to be outside, and I've seen some videotapes of children who are just standing outside, even during the day, and they're shaking. It's a very bad catastrophe, and actually just today, and when I say today, it's Sunday when we're recording this. There was another major earthquake in Turkey, which was almost a 8 Richter, which I'm sure that will make things worse. But in any case, we wanted to say that if you are able to, we would highly encourage you to help. Especially, dollars, euros, foreign currency goes a very far way in Iran, and you can make a difference in these people's lives. There's a number of charities which do have sanction waivers. One of the charities which I've been familiar with is called Gulistan Charity, and we'll drop a link to it in this episode description. Whether through them or through anyone else, try to help these people, regardless of our political views. I think everyone can agree that they need help right now.
Definitely.
And we can make a difference.
Yes.
So, moving on. One piece of news that we heard in the past week, this is from the Mizan News, which is affiliated with Iran's judiciary, is that the parents of Kian Pirfalak were summoned to court to give some explanation of surrounding their child's death and the circumstances surrounding it, and if they want to give any complaints to file them. So we thought that it would be a good time to kind of talk about this incident.
Mm-hmm. So Kian Pirfalak was a 9-year-old child from the city of Izzeh in the Khuzestan province. Him and his family were driving in his parents' vehicle, and at some point they were driving around a protest of some sort, and they were shot at by
somebody.
Yeah, but they were shot by somebody. The mother claims that they were shot by police, but the Islamic Republic news agencies, including the IRNA, blamed his death on terrorists, which they're attributing to ISIS.
Yeah, so let's keep in mind, this was shortly after there was a terrorist incident in Shiraz, in Shah Cheragh.
Right.
That was ISIS, and then shortly after that, I think I remember looking at the news, there was just stuff that popped up that there's been an incident in Izzeh. Mm-hmm. And then later it turned out that a very young boy had been killed in there, and apparently like 7 people were killed too.
Right. So 7 people died during this incident, including 2 teenagers, one by the name of Artin Rahmani and another by Seper Maksudi, who was killed by a bullet in his head.
But Kian is like 8 or 9 years old.
Yeah.
He's much younger.
Supposedly the youngest victim of the crackdown on mass MA protests.
And so first, the government agencies come and say that there's been a terrorist attack. Mm-hmm. They basically just started shooting at some people. But then during the funeral, it looks like something else happens. What happens during the funeral?
So apparently the mother is speaking at the funeral, and there's a huge audience. She has a huge audience, people who have came for the burial of Kian. She is saying that the security forces fired at their family car, and as a result, Kian was shot in the lung and died.
And by the way, the husband was also shot multiple times, but it didn't kill him, but he did like 3 surgeries.
Yeah.
Apparently, just a couple weeks ago, They took him out of the hospital, not because he was completely better, but because they thought the hospital environment might cause him to get an infection. So
Right.
they brought a nurse to someone's home. So it's so bit complicated.
Right.
But her husband was shot and wounded very badly.
Yeah.
Her son was killed.
So his mother, Zainab Mulai, she denies the government's accounts of the events and claims her son was killed by security forces.
And the weird thing is, so there's a video, and we all know that that was the mother. No one denies that that video was real. You could look it up if those of you that understand Farsi. It's on Twitter, it's on YouTube, and you can say, and she's very adamant.
Are you talking about the video that was
of her
on national TV?
We'll get there too, but I'm talking about in the graveyard.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And she comes and she tells people, I just want you to know the official story is not true. He was not killed by terrorists. He was killed by police officers. And the story that she tells, me and Shine were actually listening to it before we started the episode. She's saying that they were driving and they actually were trying to leave earlier or take an alternate route or something to basically not get
protests.
Yeah, to not get involved because they just wanted to go on with their day-to-day life. And they apparently drive past a group of police officers and plainclothesmen. And then they hear something, and it was a little bit confusing for us exactly what happened, but they hear someone say basically come back, and because it's a police officer, they're like, okay, we're going to comply.
Right.
So they take a U-turn, and they drive past those officers again, and that's when the police opens fire on them.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of bullets. They go through the car. The driver, gets multiple bullets through him. The child is also shot, and she's kind of screaming, "Don't shoot! Don't shoot!" And then they stop, and they realized it appears that they realized they made a mistake.
Yeah.
And they must have thought that they were not civilians or something else was happening. And so the police themselves apparently take them to the hospital.
Yeah.
But that's not the narrative that the government said that said it was ISIS. And then the really weird thing is, so a couple days after, she has this speech in this burial ceremony that goes viral. The TV reporters come, state television comes, and they do an interview with her. And what happens during that interview?
So she's basically saying, actually, we should just describe like what she's wearing too, because she's wearing this red jacket, and this family, they're Bakhtiaris. They're of an ethnic group in Iran called the Bakhtiaris, and in that culture, wearing red, or especially after someone was killed innocently, it means that we are out for revenge, something like that. And so in the interview, she's basically saying that so certain people are using
taking advantage of my social media.
Taking advantage of her social media and posting stories that aren't necessarily true. But it feels like this interview that she's giving is a little forced.
We were not able, we just listened to a 1.5-minute clip from it, and we couldn't find a place where she explicitly says that police officers did not shoot at my child or that terrorists shot at them. But she seems to be more saying that people are taking advantage of my statements and twisting them out of context. And don't twist my statements out of context. My page is private, and I lost my phone, so I don't even have access to my Instagram. Yeah. But she's you can literally see she's not comfortable in this.
Yeah, this interview looks a little forced.
It looks weird.
Yeah, it looks very weird. She looks very uncomfortable. She's constantly rocking back and forth, and I mean, she just lost her son, but it kind of seems like they're forcing this interview.
A few weeks later, she used to work at some art school as a, I think, graphic design teacher. She gets fired from her job.
Yeah.
And it sounds like she was fired from her job because she was saying things on social media that the government didn't like, and the speech she gave at the funeral. And there's one other thing about this, which was a lot of people talked about on social media. There was a video that she posted a few days later of her son before he was killed. And he had made some kind of boat for a science experiment.
That's right.
And he said the statement, "Be nam Khudavand rangin kaman," in the name of the God of rainbows. Yeah. I believe that's from a poem in one of Iranian school books, but that touched a lot of people's hearts. Yeah. When I was actually in Iran, I saw that written on a lot of walls, especially schools. And it said, "In the name of the God of rainbows," and it was a sign of kind of like a very innocent child. Yeah. And he was caught up in the middle of all this, and he lost his life.
Yeah, and basically the impact of his death, let's talk about that a little bit. So this sparked huge protests and international support. After Pirfalak's funeral, actually, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini's childhood home was set on fire on November 17th,
Yeah, I remember
2022,
that. Yeah.
Which is actually a museum located in
Yeah,
the
yeah.
city of
They
Khomeini.
set it in fire, and this was around the time that it was that shock of the initial death of Masa Amini had gone away, but suddenly funerals were becoming
Yeah.
a means by which protests were happening, and then a lot of funerals, and eventually on the 40th anniversary of the deaths of people, that started turning into bigger and bigger protests.
Yeah, and there was protests at the University of Tehran displaying photos of Pirfalak, and actually days after Kian Pirfalak's death, UNICEF issued a statement condemning the death and detention of children in the wake of the 2022 protests in Iran.
So he became a big symbol.
Yeah.
And right now what's happened is in mid-January, the dad was released from the hospital. He was moved to a home care. And now the courts are saying that we want you guys to give testimony.
Yeah.
Now it's not clear. It sounds like from what I read on government websites that they're kind of just saying we want to do an investigation. And since you were both firsthand witnesses, understand it. It sounds from anti-government places that they're more trying to ask them why they're deviating from the official narrative. To me, when this particular story really reminds me of the Ukrainian flight, where again, there was an incident where, now that was on a much bigger scale. It was a full airplane,
right?
But a full airplane full of people was shot down by the government, and there's a reason that probably by accident, maybe not, but there, you could see it being by accident. Now they could have just come there and said, we really messed up, and saying we messed up is not going to bring back 300 people back to life.
Well, initially they denied it, right?
But they didn't do that. They denied it was us, and they very adamantly denied it. And it was only when they were really, really forced to that they came out and changed their message. And it's, to me, this parallels that case where there seems to have been a tragedy, and they started shooting on them,
and they're shifting the blame to
terrorists.
ISIS. Yeah,
they're saying it was ISIS when it seems more believable that if the mom is saying that it was the government shooting, I don't think the mom is
some security forces.
Yeah, is some evil person that is working for Mossad that is going to sit down and be lying here. It seems much more logical that she's just upset and she just saw it and she's telling the truth.
Yeah, and she was there. She was in the car, literally. She was in that video when they're burying her son. She was saying, like, okay, we were in the car. It was me, my husband, and my 2 children. And then the cops said, come back. So we came back. And then I saw them shooting at us. Her husband was shot immediately. I believe her youngest, he ducked and wasn't shot, but then Kian was shot. So like she was there. There's no reason for her to lie about any of this.
But then if she's not lying, then that brings forward the uncomfortable truth. Then why was she in the government interview with state TV sort of saying other things? And again, it's not hard to reach the conclusion that it looks like the government is trying to force her to say a particular narrative.
Yeah, because they don't want to look bad.
Yeah, and because she's not doing that, they kicked her out of her job, and now they're getting summoned to court. Even for people that maybe don't hold the same opinion as we do on these protests, and they might think that, no, this is some Western conspiracy or something like that. Seeing details like this, I think, should make you question of, why is the government doing this and going after someone that, okay, let's even say it was an accident, it wasn't on purpose, but why is she saying one thing and then on state TV some other message is being broadcast? So that was one story that we wanted to share with you all. Right. There was another thing which was shared quite a bit on social media in the past couple of days. There was a picture of a Iranian political activist whose name is Farhad Meysami, and there's a picture of him from Evin Prison. And you could see he's very, very skinny. You can see his ribs, his arms are very, very skinny, and he's not doing too well. Yeah. And this is a result of a hunger strike that he started, and it got a lot of international attention, and it got a lot of attention on Iranian social media. People were sharing it, people were talking about it, kind of saying, be Meysam's voice.
Yeah, so Farhad Meysami, so let's talk about him a little bit. He's an Iranian doctor, teacher, and a civil activist.
He was one of the people that there's a test in Iran called concours, which that's for getting into universities, kind of like an SAT or ACT in the United States, but you just take that one test. There's no college essay or anything else.
Yeah.
And so everyone takes that test. How good you do tells you what major you get into and what university you get into. He was what they call takragami. So he was under number 10. So he was one of the top 10 people, I think, in chemistry or whatever the particular one that he went into. This guy's very, very smart.
Yes.
It reminds me of and actually Shervin's Baraye song, which apparently just won a Grammy.
Yeah.
He has a line where he says, Baraye Nukhbahay Zendani, for the geniuses who are behind bars. And Farhad Meysami is a perfect example of a person that's a genius that's behind bars.
Yeah, and as of August 2018, he was serving a 5-year sentence for crimes such as spreading propaganda against the state.
Well, let's explain that too. So, Farhad Meysami, the reason he went to prison was that there was these pins, you know those, like, I don't know what they're called, the aluminum pin things that you put like with a needle on your shirt for different causes. He made a bunch of aluminum pills and he just said, Nabe hijab ijbari. No to forced hijab. I am against mandatory hijab.
This was back then, right? This was way back.
This is when there was the Dokhtaran Khiyaban Inqilab, the girls of Inqilab Street. We can talk about in another episode. But there was the start of some civil disobedience campaigns against the hijab at that time.
Yeah, this was from years back, not recently.
I mean less than 5 years.
Yeah,
but
that's what I meant.
Yeah, like 2017, 2018-ish. And so he started spreading out these pins. Now, literally pins that you're putting on you. And he got arrested for this.
Yeah.
He's a big believer in civil disobedience. I think it's interesting that everyone that's saying, let's be the voice for Farhad Meysami and let's stand up for him, I don't know if it's on purpose or they don't know, but they're ignoring what happened to him then. Mm-hmm. He was arrested in 2018 because of these pins that he put. And there was a lot of international attention around him then there. Yeah. Even some international organizations, Amnesty International, started writing things. And eventually, the U.S. State Department wrote a letter, and let me bring up, or they made a statement. The U.S. State Department on December 7th, 2017, said, "We are deeply concerned about the rapidly deteriorating health of Dr. Farhad Meysami. The United States condemns the arbitrary detention of Dr. Meysami. This is a brazen violation of human rights. The United States calls on the Iranian regime to immediately release Dr. Meysami and all political prisoners who are unjustly imprisoned. The Iranian people deserve a government that respects their rights and legitimate demands, not one that subjects them to slow deaths and degrading cells for peacefully demanding what is rightfully theirs, universal human rights." Human rights. So once this is released, and remember, at this time, this is the Trump State Department. Yeah. Trump is still the president. Meysami actually wrote a letter in response. And so that one was December 7th. He wrote this letter early January of 2018. And there's two parts to his letter. Yeah. In the first part, he kind of talks about his experience with the Iranian courts, why he thinks that they dealt with him unjustly, particularly banning him from the lawyer he wanted to use. And he thinks that the way they asked him questions and the questions they asked him were illegal. And in some cases, he even did civil disobedience and basically didn't do what they were asking him. So he talks about that. What was really interesting for me was the second part of his letter. In the second part of his letter, he starts off and he says that, I'm quoting from him right now, "I was flipping through the papers when I saw an article that shook me to my core. Apparently, the Trump administration's Department of State had called for my freedom. I wondered how there could be any possible correlation between Trump's State Department, freedom, and myself. Before his appointment, Mike Pompeo, the current Secretary of State, had been a strong advocate of the Bomb Iran campaign. Now, how can such a system with such a perspective about freedom be in any way related to perspective and understanding that I have about freedom? And I am only one individual among the thousands and thousands of Iranians who would die for their beloved Iran. I would much rather spend all my life imprisoned by a group of my oppressive and ignorant compatriots and try to correct their wrongdoing through reformist action than to spend a second submitting to the shame and disgrace of support from those who did not follow through with their obligations and withdrew from the rational and peaceful JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, against all principles of morality and international law, and reimposed inhumane sanctions which have thrown millions of my fellow Iranians into poverty. Especially while I know with certainty that if my country's rulers had given them, talking about the US, a share in the theft and destruction of our national resources, they would have easily closed their eyes on not only my imprisonment, but have been even okayed with them butchering and dismembering dozens of activists like myself with a bone saw. And when he says with a bone saw, he's making a reference to Jamal Khashoggi, who the Saudi Arabia assassinated him in Turkey. So essentially, this guy wrote a letter and says, I don't want your support, United States. And he specifically talks about the fact that the Trump administration pulled out of the JCPOA and they reimposed sanctions. And he's saying, I'm against that.
Right.
I don't need a foreign country's support, and especially a foreign country that did this action. What was interesting that just a couple of weeks after Meysami wrote this letter, Masih Alinejad, who's another well-known Iranian opposition activist, she met with Mike Pompeo.
Yeah.
And she took a picture with him when she was in the United States. And that was a very interesting contrast for me. And by the way, a lot of the Iranian activists who were talking about Meysami and raising their voices for him, they suddenly stopped talking when that happened. Some of these anonymous Twitter accounts even started attacking him, saying, you know what, it's a good thing that he's in prison, and making fun of him for being so skinny because he was taking a hunger strike then too.
Yeah.
And I just think that, Masih Alinejad is free to, pursue whatever political activity she thinks. I'm not going to sit down and tell someone you have to have one particular point of view. But Masih Alinejad continuously, even if you look at her interviews today, she will come and basically say that if you want to support the Iranian people, don't negotiate with the Iranian government. Don't restart the nuclear deal. Yeah, continue sanctions.
Kick out all the diplomats from your countries, and continue to sanction Iran.
And she's saying anyone that disagrees with this is complicit in the oppression of the Iranian people. But you can see very clearly she does not have the right to say that that's what everyone wants.
Yeah.
There are people that are against the Iranian government, like Dr. Meysami, who are in jail and have suffered from the Iranian government.
And are still against,
Yeah, but they're still against sanctions. And they're still against, they're even saying the JCPOA was a good thing and it was a rational agreement and it made sense. Mm-hmm. So it's not just putting money in the pockets of the IRGC and supporting the oppressors. Dr. Meysami is not the only person who was like this. If we're going to show his picture and if we're going to spread his voice and be his voice, I think it's a disservice not to mention that he had this reaction and also point out the fact that a lot of people in the Iranian opposition did not mention his name once after that happened.
Right. And
that's truly a shame.
That's right. Until now, right? They're talking about him now because recent photos came out of his hunger strike.
But it's interesting because they don't talk about what happened last time, and they don't talk about how some of these very people who are spreading these pictures, they very explicitly became quiet the second after this happened. And it's a shame. Again, there's also political prisoners that maybe they're for pro-sanctions. Like Hossein Ronaqi, for example, he was a guy who's a very high-profile guy, and he's very vocally against any government negotiating with the Iranian government, and he's very vocally pro-sanctions. Okay, that's his opinion. I personally disagree with him. But I'm not going to say that every single person in Iran agrees with me, but he doesn't have the right to do that either. And I think if we want to be logical, we need to understand that there are different people with different opinions. And to me, the ones who are respectable are the ones that they're not reaching their hands out to foreign governments.
No.
And they're saying that, you know what, we don't want help from people who don't have the best interests of the Iranian people in mind, but we want to fix this ourselves. What do you think about that, Sean?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people I feel like, especially like Masih Alinejad, who are looking for an opportunity to make a buck. At the end of the day, she's on the payroll, right? Isn't she on?
I think she gets money for VOA.
Yeah, she gets not only from the VOA, from the State Department.
Yeah, I think because they give funds out for like different what they call pro-democracy stuff.
That's a big telltale sign right there. If you're getting paid by the government of a country that is putting sanctions on Iran, like why are you getting paid? Like what is your goal? Is your goal to make money, or is your goal to actually make a difference?
And actually, just on the subject of sanctions, and then we'll move on. A lot of these people will make the argument that, well, if you want the Iranian government to be overthrown, you need to increase sanctions, increase pressure. And usually the example they use for that is South Africa. The apartheid government in South Africa was one that the West did sanction quite a bit. and eventually that government changed.
Yeah.
But the thing that they'll ignore is the apartheid government in South Africa was heavily dependent on the West. They traded with the West heavily, and that's why they were very vulnerable to pressure from the West.
Yeah.
Iran does not trade much with the West, particularly the United States. Iran is not vulnerable. When 1979, the Iranian Revolution happened, it wasn't because of sanctions. Just like in Tunisia when there was a revolution in 2011, in Egypt when there was a revolution, in all these countries, there's plenty of examples where governments change and it was not a result of sanctions. In Iranian history, if you want to talk about causing governments to change, the only example which is similar to that is Reza Shah. Reza Shah was overthrown because the English army basically came in.
Yeah, they came and kicked them out.
And plucked them out. And unless that's what they want, which most people deny that's what they want, it's difficult to see how asking for foreign help is going to make a difference here. Right. But moving onwards, one other piece of news that actually came out today that we wanted to discuss was this statement from the Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Khamenei.
So apparently the Supreme Leader of Iran, he issued a pardon, and apparently 10,000 people...
Tens of thousands.
We
don't know exactly how many, but apparently there's a lot of people.
Yeah, were released from a prison, and apparently, however, there's some conditions I've heard. I'm not sure exactly.
Right. So basically, I think it's an offer. I don't know if anyone's been freed yet. This happens a lot in Iran, but apparently this is the biggest case in the past 3 or 4 years. Some of them are just general people that are in jail for financial offenses or bankruptcy, but a large number of them do relate to the recent protests.
Yeah. Go ahead.
The conditions that they put though was that anyone who's convicted of espionage, of
working with a foreign government, has a dual national,
or they were accused of damaging public property, which probably means like burning down a trash can or throwing, a Molotov cocktail at a police station.
That's what it says in this article, right?
They're not allowed to be freed. Anyone that fought the police officers and injured the police officer or something like that, they can't be freed. And I think in order to be freed, they have to make a statement basically saying that they're sorry and they won't do this again. But if they do this, then they'll be freed.
Yeah. So the leader of the Islamic Republic, by Ghulam Hossein Mohsen Ejei.
Mohsen Ejei is the judiciary.
He's the head of the judiciary. He said that during recent events, a number of people, especially young people, committed wrong actions and crimes as a result of the indoctrination and propaganda of the enemy. Since the foreign enemies and anti-revolutionary currents plans to have been foiled, many of these youth now regret their actions. He added that these young people are not in any way against the Islamic Republic system, so we also offer them this opportunity by offering amnesty and closing their case at every stage so that their future will not be affected by criminal records. Obviously, if these pardoned people commit crimes again, they will be dealt with more severely according to the law.
So basically, I feel like how on one end of the spectrum, they executed a number of people and handed out quite severe sentences to some people. There was, I think there was some couple that did a dance or something on public, and they were given 10 years of prison, which is...
Well, I don't think that was exactly the reason why, right? It was some other reason.
I wasn't familiar.
I believe that the reason why they've been given this lengthy prison sentence is because they were using their social media platform to teach people to how to, I don't know.
So it wasn't just for that dance.
It was some other reason as well. It wasn't particularly just the dance.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. Thank you for pointing that out.
Because if you look at the Western media, that's all they point out. It's like, these two people danced and, I don't know, they were holding hands or whatever. And that's why they were...
But the reasoning that was given was not... Well, regardless, so there's a group of people that have been dealt with severely. Yeah. But it looks like they're also trying to say that, on the other hand, if you're sorry and you sort of back away from those, there's quite a few people that will be freed. A lot of groups in the West and even different Iranian groups kind of gave a very skeptical response to this and kind of said, okay, well, it doesn't matter, and that's not going to change anything. To me, if my uncle or my cousin or my son was in prison, they were freed, I would be happy. I wouldn't say it doesn't matter. Definitely. I don't think that suddenly changes that the government is still engaging in a number of the things that don't make any sense and they're not good. And it looks like they want to crack down on hijab after some time of being tolerant towards it. So it's not a good thing. Mm-hmm. But at the same, it's their government isn't suddenly good. But at the same time, I think it is positive that some people are freed.
Yeah.
And I hope that everyone else gets freed too.
And with that being said, we want to thank you guys for tuning in to the Chetoy podcast. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode.
You can find us on Spotify. You can find us on Anchor, on YouTube. It's honestly, they're all just linked in our Instagram bio. The best thing is to just go there. Particularly our Instagram, we're trying to get discussions through our stories. And we encourage you to answer us, to talk, to get your friends to respond to. Please don't feel like this podcast is just dedicated to one particular political opinion. If you disagree with what we say, we want to hear your opinion and we will share your opinion. Our entire philosophy is that we need to become tolerant of each other's views and move away from these cliches of black versus white, and instead open our minds up and listen to each other. So with that philosophy, we'd love it if you spread the word, give us 5-star ratings on whatever platform you follow. Thank you so much, and we hope you'll listen to the next episode.
Thank you.